Well, now we're starting a new series today in A Woman's World. We're going to introduce to you very well-known musicians who will tell you about the instrument they play and the part that that instrument plays in the formation of an orchestra. And it's my pleasure to welcome to the studio today a musician of international repute, Mr. Neville Alladio. Neville, how nice of you to come in. Well, Neville, you are leading flautist with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, aren't you?
Yeah.
When did you take up the flute? How old were you?
About 12 years of age.
And what made you decide on this particular instrument?
Well, I played the piano first, and I had an accident with my hand, and I had to choose an instrument that I could press my first finger down flat on something. I couldn't play a violin, so this instrument, I was able to prick my first finger flat. Mm-hmm. So I took on flute for that reason.
Did you have a well-known teacher?
No, I did have an initial training in music at the conservatorium on the piano, but I taught the flute myself. I taught myself the flute.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a picture here now of the Sydney Symphony Orchestra. Neville, can you point out to us where you sit?
Yes, in the center of the orchestra.
Mm-hmm. That, of course, is in the wind section, isn't it?
That is the wind block, they call it.
Yes. What are the other blocks in the orchestra?
Well, the orchestra comprises 4 sections. That's the string section, the wind section, the brass, and percussion.
Mm. Neville, for an ordinary concert, would there be only one flautist employed?
Not necessarily. Some works don't even have a flute. In a symphony concert this week, we are using 4 flutes and 2 piccolos in a work of Strauss.
It depends on the works that are going to be played,
Yes, it all
of course.
depends.
Neville, with the flute, would you suggest to any young child taking up music that they take up the flute?
Well, of course, I'm in favor of the flute. It's a very, very beautiful instrument. It's easy. I think it's one of the most natural instruments that you can express with. There's not much difficulty in getting a sound out of it at first, but of course frightfully difficult to master.
Well, is there much of a career for flute players?
Oh yes, music is coming to the fore, especially 18th century, 17th and 16th century music, which there is an enormous amount of music written for the flute.
Who were the great composers who wrote best for the flute?
Well, for the most beautiful sound in tone, shall I say, not in technical passages, mostly the French writers. They write magnificently for flute. People like Debussy, Ravel, Fore, all most composers of the end of this last century and the beginning of this century.
How far back does the flute go?
Well, it's been traced. A tomb recently opened, the Pisa tomb, which has dated back 3,000 years BC. There are murals on the wall in this tomb of flute players. So we can go back 3,000 years before Christ at least.
And what were they made of in those days?
I should imagine wood, or they even use reeds, certainly not metal.
Are they nearly all metal today?
Mostly, all over the world.
Precious metals?
Yes, it ranges from even brass, silver-plated, silver, gold, and platinum.
What is the advantage over wood, Neville?
Well, the extreme temperatures of different countries, the silver does not in any way endanger, the climate doesn't endanger a silver instrument, whereas wood can crack easily and the instrument is useless. But a metal instrument can have a severe test with high temperatures and low temperatures.
But do you think there was a sweeter sound with the wooden ones?
Well, actually, it's a very difficult thing to say. I like playing the wooden flute myself. I prefer the silver for everyday work. It's a much easier instrument to play, but it's one of these controversial subjects. Some prefer wood, some don't.
Neville, now what is the training that goes behind not just learning to play the flute, but when you have very difficult works coming up, difficult passages, what training do you
Well, naturally, I practice quite a good deal, every day in fact. One has to keep oneself in perfect physical training. You have to look after your diet, you have to do exercise. That's of course, if you wish to become expert on your instruments, you have to modify certain, shall I say, vices. Smoking, for instance. I smoke myself, but you generally have to look after your health to a great deal, because the stream of air that you use to play a flute can be compared, say, to the steadiness of a bow being drawn down on a violin.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have to sign off our program now, but just show us, before we go, perhaps underneath my sign-off, how you tune up before an orchestra. Well, I think that's probably one of the most exciting sounds in a theatre, the tuning up of the orchestra. I always think the concert's a terrible anticlimax afterwards. Thank you very much, Neville Alladio. We'll continue this series, and until next week at the same time, when I'll be bringing you another Woman's World program, may I wish you all a very happy week.